Today's businesses are on a vigilant watch for threats in an ongoing cyber war. It's time to get real-world solutions to protect and secure your valuable business information anytime, anywhere. Welcome to Cybersecurity America.
Today on Cybersecurity America, we're joined by a true leader in the cybersecurity and compliance space, Jim Goepel, CEO of Fathom Cyber, a consultant firm helping organizations navigate the complex world of cybersecurity compliance. And they have a special focus on CMMC, assessment preparation, CUI education, and expert witness services. And what makes Jim's background so unique is a combination of legal, technical, and business expertise. He's a lawyer, an electrical and computer engineer, with certifications that include the CMMC, certified as provisional instructor, and certified information security manager. He's written multiple books on CUI and CMMC compliance, and he has personally conducted and participated in several CMMC certifications and joint surveillance voluntary assessments. Jim serves as the president of Peak InfoSec, the president of Ascend Cyber, and he's the co-founder of the CMMC Information Institute and adjunct faculty at Rochester Institute of Technologies, RIT. Now, he's been deeply involved in shaping the CMMC ecosystem since its inception, including helping to create the Cyber AB, where he served as a treasurer and was instrumental in developing its financial and training infrastructure. Jim's research on enterprise risk management and cybersecurity has been published internationally, and throughout his career, he's held high-impact technical, legal, and leadership roles across government, academia, and industry. We're thrilled to have Jim with us today and discuss the evolving challenges of cybersecurity compliance, risk management, and what organizations need to know as they prepare for that next generation of defense contracting requirements. Welcome to the show today, Jim. It's really great to have you. Now, I covered a lot there, but did I cover you?
You did, Josh. I think that was more than enough, but thank you.
You want to give everybody an overview of what that is, why that's important. We hear that term in cybersecurity, but do you want to just start off with definition? What is it? What isn't it?
Sure. So at the end of the day, the government recognized, and specifically the Department of Defense recognized back in 2016, that it was really losing a lot of sensitive information, things that are really critical. They're unclassified, but it's information that is still really sensitive, like personally identifiable information or the designs for next generation stealth bombers, some of which is going to be classified, but portions of it aren't. And what we were seeing was that defense contractors were being given that information and it was leaking out. Our adversaries were getting access to it really easily and using it for all sorts of purposes, both to strengthen themselves and as well as to probe for weaknesses, or in the case of PII, for example, using that to target military members, either for intelligence purposes or for other purposes, just to throw them off their games. So DoD recognized we need to do something better. And there was another initiative going on inside the government at the same time called the Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI program. And DoD published a bunch of requirements and said, okay, contractors, you have until 2018 to get it done. Contractors promised that they were getting it done, but they didn't. And DoD kept seeing that the contractors weren't meeting the requirements. So they said, okay, asking in a contract, hey, are you doing these things? Most, especially smaller defense contractors, they just sign the contract. They don't actually read it. They don't understand what the issues are in it. And that created some of the issues here. The government said, okay, instead of trusting people and just letting them sign off that, yes, we are doing this, we need to bring in a third party to do the work and to validate. And that's where the CMMC program came from. It's called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. You're bringing in a third party assessor to review and to validate the fact that you are meeting certain requirements. Now, not every defense contractor needs that third party, but the ones who are handling that sensitive stuff that I was talking about, the especially sensitive things like those designs or personally identifiable information, healthcare information, that kind of stuff, they are going to need the third party certifications.
So this started off and it's focused towards government. So this is not for the commercial side, right? You're not going to see anybody doing commercial CMCC.
So actually, that's likely to change, because the funny thing is, in order for information to be controlled unclassified information, the stuff that is what, again, requires you to then go get that third-party certification, that information has to be protected by a law, regulation, or government-wide policy. And when you look at the list of all the kinds of information that are protected that fall under that CUI category, it's things, again, like banking information, personally identifiable information. There's a whole bunch of stuff that commercial entities handle too. It technically doesn't meet the true definition of controlled unclassified information because it's on the commercial side, and to be CUI, it has to be the government's information. But otherwise, it looks and feels just like the stuff that the government is protecting. So from a cybersecurity perspective, and the question that management always wants to know is, when have we done enough? We could invest forever and we can always make things more secure. How do we know when we're meeting that sort of minimum threshold that we need to meet so that we're not spending too much money on security? And so the government actually did a risk analysis and said, okay, when we give a government contractor, a commercial entity, this sensitive information, what do we want them to do? How do we want them to protect it? And they created this document called NIST Special Publication 800-171, and that defines the minimum set of security that's supposed to be in place when you're handling PII, PHI, and other forms of controlled and classified information. We expect that as CMMC certifications become more frequent and more widespread, that it will actually grow and the commercial space will wind up adopting it. The 800-171 is really interesting. It competes with other standards like ISO 27001 and others, but fundamentally there are some things that make it unique that really add some extra value and make it the best choice for a lot of companies today.
That's interesting. So you said October these companies have to be certified. Is that right?
So that's actually a common misconception, but you're close. There are a bunch of moving parts in all of this. There's a bunch of regulations that are happening. There's a rumor out there that October 1st is when you have to be certified by. That's actually not true. There is more wiggle room in there. We know that the government is about to publish a regulation, literally could be next week sometime, that will trigger those CMMC requirements. So sometime in late October, early November is when we really expect to see all of this kick in. It's been 5 years in the making. And for those of us that have been in it from the beginning, we can't wait for this to start. But yeah, it is coming soon, and companies need to start down that road. If they haven't already started getting ready, they need to be starting down that road and preparing for CMMC. When CMMC was first announced back in 2019, the DoD had some ideas about how to implement everything. And this was under the first Trump administration, and they pushed a bunch of stuff through, but it was toward the end of the first Trump administration. And then when the Biden administration came in, a lot of businesses raised a fuss and said, you need to take a hard look at this. And like every administration, they put a strategic pause on all the regulatory changes, including CMMC. That slowed everything down. They approached it from a very different strategic perspective, probably the right direction at the end of the day, because they added it as a regulation, which increases scrutiny, slows everything down more, et cetera, but it actually makes it a stronger, better program. And of course, it took 4 years for that to all play out. So then the Biden administration is out. Trump administration comes in and says, we're going to put a strategic pause on all regulations, and we're going to reassess whether they all need to be done. And so it has been a long, slow slog to get to where we are. But again, now we're at the point where all of those regulations, or at least most of them, the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and we're ready to see the CMMC program kick off.
That's interesting. So what is the market like right now? You seem to be quite busy here and growing, but what does your company focus on? I know there's more than just CMCC, but what does it Fathom focus on?
So Fathom helps companies get ready for their CMMC certifications, and we're booked out through, again, this is early September. We're pretty much booked through the end of the year. So the market has started to heat up. The first couple of years, it was slow. Many companies were waiting because there were strategic pauses in the regulatory process, or CMMC was being rethought. Companies understandably were putting off making the investment. But over the last year and a half, there's been a concerted effort at DoD to really get the message out that you need to start paying attention to this. And now we're seeing a big pickup, especially now with the summer being over. We're starting to see a big push from companies to start getting ready for CMMC.
Oh, that's good. One of the things that I know from being a technical cybersecurity guy is that I hate doing all that paperwork side of things and the functions and so forth just seems monotonous. And then sometimes you don't seem to really be getting a lot of benefit. Like once you implement the framework or the tool set, or you did the risk, it really didn't do much. So from a security perspective, the CMCC, does it really stop cyber attacks? Does it really do what the core mission of probably it is, to standardize and stop attacks?
So I'll say that no, it doesn't actually help stop attacks. What it helps with is making you more resilient and helping you understand when something, we all see those CISA notices, right? That there's a bunch of new vulnerabilities that are out or other notices that are coming out. Helps you understand better what's on your network to begin with so that you understand how applicable they are. When you have an incident, you are better prepared for that incident. Patching and doing other things to help reduce your vulnerability surface. So there are different things that are in there that help contribute to making you more secure, but it's actually really more on that resiliency side because you're able to respond better. You've already identified all the people that you need to notify. There's a ton of legal requirements that kick in when you have a breach. So you need to know who you're supposed to talk to. Trying to figure it out in the middle of a breach is less than desirable. That's one of the basic things, is that you need to understand who are you supposed to report incidents to and how quickly do you need to report them. But they are legal responsibilities. You have other obligations, and the penalties that go for not following them can be really significant. So there's some real benefit to all the prep work that goes into 800-171.
No, that's interesting. So what do you think is coming up in our future here, just from a cybersecurity perspective? Let's take a step back here. You see the market and threats and what customers are saying differently than I see them all day. You see them in a GRC type context and framework type context. I see them in like threat management and incident response context. What do you see moving forward as some trends that you're picking up on?
So we're seeing that the CMMC program started off as a DoD effort, like I said, and it is still in its early stages. But there are some bigger initiatives to expand CMMC likely to other federal agencies. There are also other governments that are looking at adopting the CMMC program because DoD's reach is international. So the Canadian government already has a program in place, their CCPC program, where they are basically doing something very similar to CMMC. There are other governments around the world that are also looking at adopting this. So the CMMC program will likely continue to expand. Its reach will expand, and also the requirements are going to change. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they've already published a newer version of what's called 800-171 for the next generation of requirements and to match more modern threats. DoD has hard-coded CMMC currently to the old version of that requirement. We're expecting to see that'll get updated. There's a bunch of changes that are coming down the pike, but again, businesses need to get started now. They really need to be paying attention to this stuff now and at least addressing the current set of requirements. They are non-trivial, and the companies that put them in place, once they get their certifications, most of them are like, wow, this was hard and it was a slog to get here, but we're actually a better company for it. And so I think we will see on your side of the fence, I hope that we will see a reduction in the number of incidents that we're seeing, especially for stupid mistakes. Right? There's the systems that haven't been patched for 3 years that have known actively exploited vulnerabilities out there. The 800-171 should help catch those and reduce those, especially from groups that are handling that sensitive information, like the design for the next kind of body armor and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, obviously, you and I talked before. I started off my own company, Darkstack 7. Does that mean that if I wanted to go after government contracts, I would need to get this certification as well? If I was going to do work for the U.S. Marine Corps here, I'd have to get CMMC certified. And for a small business like myself, that seems to be a pretty big lift. Is it worth the squeeze?
The answer to all three of those is yes. So you said, do I need to be CMMC certified? And the answer there is most likely yes, given the kinds of information that you would have access to So I'll give you my favorite lawyer answer of it depends. If you're going to be bringing sensitive information into your environment, then yes, you're going to need that CMMC certification. If you were a body shop and you were just going to go work on the government's equipment, you probably won't need at least CMMC level 2. You won't need the third-party certification. You'll still need to comply with some basic requirements, but you don't need to have the third-party certification. Now, your big question is it worth it? There are a lot of companies that are on the fence right now. The math that we always tell people to do is let's look at how many contracts you have. Let's look at the revenue that you're generating from those contracts, and let's look at the cost to both implement this and then eventually to maintain compliance. And does it make financial sense for you to stay in this business? Understanding, though, that other companies are also making that same decision, and many of them are probably going to drop out. So if that increases your likelihood of winning contracts, maybe there is some extra value in you making this investment because the number of contracts may increase. I think his company either doubled or tripled their sales to one of the suppliers that they work for. They were supplier of the year. They had all of these other advantages for having met the CMMC requirements. So yeah, the answer is it can be. In some cases, it may not be. And that is a very fair question.
What are the stark differences? If I was to say, what are the most challenging area of CMCC compliance? What would it be? Some areas I think probably would be easier, and then some would like really be hard. Which ones are the really hard ones to be compliant with?
Most people jump to the technical things like getting MFA, multi-factor authentication, rolled out in an organization. Just culturally, that change can be a real challenge. Or there's this requirement that all of your encryption modules have to be what's called FIPS 140-2 validated. You have to understand what's happening in your environment. And that can be a real challenge. But honestly, those to me are technical. Those are actually solvable problems for people. The bigger picture issues are the true culture change that has to happen inside of the organization. If management isn't buying off on this, if they don't understand that they have to limit access to information to only people that have a lawful government purpose to handle that information. We have one client, they like to let the community come in and use some of their facilities for meetings and that kind of stuff, just to be a better part of the community, which conceptually is a great idea. But under CMMC, I can't have those people, those members of the community, just walking into an area where that sensitive, the controlled unclassified information is. They literally have to escort people when they're in that environment. And that runs contrary to the way this company runs. So we had to do an analysis. We sat down with them and said, okay, look, if we put up a wall here and put a lock on this door, and we make sure that only people who are authorized can get through that door, then you can still run your business and you can do all the fun things that you want to do on the front end, but we're still securing the government's information on the back end. The universities, they are open, right? A lot of places want people to be able to walk through and look at the work that they're doing. They're proud of the research that they're doing. And the whole idea with research is to share your information, et cetera. And now with CMMC, again, if you're depending on the funding and the contract and all sorts of stuff, you may not be able to let that research student in and see that information. So cultural changes have to happen, and those have to be driven by management. Management needs to understand the business impact and really push their employees to adopt these changes, because most of them won't. At least not initially, not without that management push. I've worked with a lot of salespeople, for example, who are willing to bend the rules when it comes to certain things because they want that win. They want the next sale, and you can't do that. And so management needs to be ready to, in some cases, fire that really good salesperson because they are continuing to break the rules, and the risk exposure to the organization is that high that they need to get rid of that amazing salesperson because they just won't follow the rules. Again, FIPS 140-2 and some of the other stuff are problems, but they pale in comparison from the true business perspective.
That makes sense. And what does it cost somebody to get CMC? Is this a huge lift for, let's just say, a mid-sized company, 2,000 employees, they wanted to be CMC certified? And what is the ceiling for something like that?
So it all depends. It depends on, for a 2,000 person company, it depends on whether they need to have everybody in that environment. If they have a ton of technical debt, they haven't been maintaining their systems for forever. There are just some foundational things that honestly they should have been doing all along anyway. We see, for example, companies that are using firewalls that are end of life and end of support, but it's still out there as they think it's protecting them. And we all know that those vulnerabilities are just hanging out there and the bad guys are walking right through the firewall, but they haven't made those investments, and they like to blame CMMC for them having to make that investment. That's, in my opinion, that is not a fair thing to blame on CMMC. There's other stuff that is, but that kind of thing isn't. So if you're a really immature 2,000 employee company, and there are those companies, this is an expensive proposition. If you're a relatively mature company and you're doing okay, it doesn't have to be that bad. The bigger issues come into exactly what kinds of information you're handling and what environments you can be in. If you're a Microsoft shop, for example, whether you can't stay in commercial, but if you want to move to GCC or GCC High, there are costs associated with that migration. GCC High is very expensive. Do you build an enclave and you only put some of your people in there because you don't have to put everyone in? There's all these different considerations that go into that. So there's no good answer for what does it cost, because there's just so many different variables. Rough order of magnitude for a smaller business, 50 to 100 employees, you're probably looking at an investment of around $100,000 to get ready for CMMC. Now, then you also have that CMMC certification cost. And again, the answer is it depends. Rough order of magnitude for a typical run-of-the-mill assessment, you're looking between $50,000 and $75,000. It is about 3 weeks worth of time for 2 people, plus a half a week for somebody else. All of the people that are involved, because of the way DoD has written the CMMC program, they all have to have lots of letters after their names, and they have to have a lot of experience. And so, of course, they are expensive. And so that's where a lot of that cost comes in, is just we have to structure it that way. We don't have a choice. Believe me, all of the C3PAOs are trying to find ways to reduce the cost of those assessments, but there's a point where we literally just can't.
James, I think we cover a lot of great ground here. If people want to know more about CMMC, and I get tongue-tied with the acronym all the time, CMCC, CMCCCC, CCCP, just
exactly.
CISSP, CISM. So it gets me all flustered sometimes. But if they want to know more about your company and what you do, where do they reach out to you? What's your website?
Sure. So fathomcyber.com is where I spend most of my time. That is our consulting company. We also have peakinfosec.com. That is our CMMC C3PAO. We conduct the CMMC certifications. We have a training company called Ascend Cyber, ascendcyber.com if you want to take classes. And if you're really just starting off, I started a nonprofit, and it's called the CUI Institute. You mentioned it before as the CMMC Information Institute. We're actually going through a name change for it. So the CUI Institute has a lot of free resources, has a lot of educational materials that are just available to the public or for our members. Membership is $25 a year. So it's a nominal fee, and you get access to a bunch of training materials and other information to help you with this process. Because when I helped create the CMMC accreditation body, I heard over and over again how much misinformation there was in the marketplace. And I wanted to help companies. My heart is with small businesses. I wanted to make sure that they had access to resources that were hopefully trusted and that gave them the information they needed to make smart decisions going forward. I understand that $100,000 to $150,000 to get ready and get certified for a small business, that's a lot of money. And so the more we can do to help you make good strategic investments and not waste that money, that was the important thing for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think it could be a little daunting. It's easier just to say, can you bring some expertise in for this area? I want to make sure I get it right, be able to drive that to conclusion. Versus if you just maintain and you're a little more mature. I've done cybersecurity for this one processing plant and then an OT environment. And I tell you, the machines were so old that they got the motherboards off of eBay. These were i386 machines. Right? This was 30 years ago, those machines were running. And they're in production, this OT network. One of the smelters was like 50 years old. They don't even have replacement cost estimated because something that's old. It was just really an interesting, the OT environment, and to see where you don't necessarily have OT concerns everywhere, but you do, I would say, in a Department of Defense manufacturing site where you're doing drones for the government or any of that stuff. And then just the technology you use to do that manufacturing can be compromised by other countries. And so it just becomes a really complicated mess of security. So you can see where the Department of Defense really has their hands full trying to put their arms around that.
And those OT issues are very common, especially in the manufacturing field. And there are techniques for doing it. Of course, there's costs associated with dealing with those techniques, but you don't necessarily have to get rid of that equipment, right? You can compartmentalize, you can do other things as long as you understand what the CMMC requirements are and how to meet them. There are techniques that you can use that help limit your risk exposure and that allow you to continue to run that stuff. Historically, computers came out and it was your brother-in-law's kid who was interested in computers that set up your network for you. And they set up a flat network because that's the easiest thing to do. And now you have that smelter and you have all this other equipment that's sitting on the same network, running on the same IP addresses as everything else. And that's where you start to have all of these risks, because to your point, that 386 has a ton of known vulnerabilities associated with it. An attacker that gets their foot in the door can exploit those and do all sorts of fun things using that, if nothing else, as the base of operations. But they can also start monkeying with your operations too. There are techniques that you can do to help just reduce that risk and isolate everything and et cetera, where again, I don't have to go buy a new smelter. I can do other things where I don't have to make that high of an investment.
So if somebody wanted to redirect their career and say they want to do these CMMC assessments, where does the certification path? If I spend X amount of dollars to go get certified on that, I can make X amount of dollars consulting because this is a hot thing right now. So what would I do if I'm one of the listeners here and I'm going, okay, I'd like to do some of this work? Is it that entailed? How do I get certified in?
There are 3 tiers to the certifications. There is what's called the CMMC Certified Professional, which is the basic tier for if you want to go into that assessment role. They're basically junior assessors, somebody who has limited experience. That's a great place for them to start. You do have to have some technical background. You have to have a basic certification like a Network Plus or something like that. So you do have to have some experience in IT and tech. You can't just be coming from teaching and jump right into it. But once you have that basic experience and you have a couple of years under your belt helping companies get ready for CMMC, then you can sit for the CMMC Certified Assessor or CCA exam, and you take a class. The classes are mandatory for both CCP and CCA. You have to go sit through an educational program, and then that unlocks the ability to sit for those exams. And then there's one more tier above that, the lead CCA or lead CMMC Certified Assessor. And that lead CCA, you have to have management experience. You have to have done this stuff for a while, and there's a whole path to get there. So depending on who you are and how long you've been working in this field, there are lots of different opportunities for you. There is huge demand. So my back of the envelope math was that we need about 4,500 CCAs and lead CCAs, those certified assessors, to really meet industry demand. And right now, I think there's about 600 or 800, somewhere in that range. So we're still almost an order of magnitude below where we need to be. So there is a lot of demand. If you are a highly experienced IT cyber person and are interested in helping secure the nation, it's a great way to make a career transition and pivot and get into a high demand field. Several of our companies are hiring, and we're looking for people with those backgrounds. So if you have that background, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the CMMC requirements. It's cyberab.org is where you can go to learn more about it. That is the CMMC accreditation body. They have all the information that you need. And then when you're ready to take the training, come to ascendcyber.com and you can learn from us.
Ladies and gentlemen, James Goepel, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate you joining us today. And everybody that's listening, I appreciate y'all going to his website, checking out the services he has. Also check out DarkStack 7. So cybersecurity penetration testing, security consulting, visas, just that one-stop shop for your solutions. Always follow the show here. Do comment, subscribe, push that out to your channel, let everybody know. as we try to grow the show. Stay secure, and I'll talk to everyone soon.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.